and welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast, where each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who will offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to really help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Alistair Bryce-Clegg and I am your host for this week's TDS Talking Early Years podcast. I am an early years consultant and author. Now, throughout this series, we're going to be discussing the importance of nurturing social and emotional well-being in the early years and really trying to inspire you with guidance and resources that will support your practice. And today I am delighted to introduce Kate Moxley as my guest. Good afternoon, Kate. How are you?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. Great to be here with you.
And great to be here with you. And I know Kate of old, so I know this is going to be good. But before we get started, for anybody that's not come across your work, I mean, how dare they? But can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I have worked in the early years sector for over 25 years. My background is early years and education, worked in a variety of different roles throughout that time. I have been self-employed for over 6 years now, and I specialise in mental health and wellbeing, sharing my own lived experience as an educator, working and living and suffering and experiencing mental health issues. And I have trained as a mental health first aid England instructor. And my aim really is to increase mental health literacy within our sector for the children, but also for educators. And so I'm delighted to be here to continue this conversation around that subject. And I'm also an author of the book Guides to Mental Health for Early Years Educators. It's part of the Little Minds Matter series. And focuses all around well-being and encouraging conversations, thinking about how we can take care of ourselves, but also look out for other people as well. And this is the stuff I wish someone had taught me about, or we had been perhaps enabled or empowered to think about. So that's the work that I do at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a lovely long list, and we're really glad to have you. And also, I have actually read the book, so I'm going to say, people often say, yes, and you must read Kate's book. It is really good, so if you can get your hands on a copy, that would be great. So over the next 4 episodes, Kate and I are going to kind of delve into, and we'll only be able to touch the surface around how we can really foster a sense of well-being in our children in early years, but also within ourselves, because the two are intrinsically linked, but also thinking about how that sense of well-being then connects to the development of those children who then become adults like us, who will have all of those different challenges for mental health and well-being. And the better equipped we are to manage them by strategies we've had early in our life, then the more fulfilled we will be. And hopefully, life is never going to be easy, but the easier our life will be. So, Kate, to start off with, in terms of factors that really affect the mental health and well-being of children, what are the common things that you come across?
From conversations and the work I'm doing nationally, I'm speaking to educators who are at that, crucial time of the year where there's a lot of change and there's a lot of transition. So I suppose bringing that into the conversation around obviously the children's well-being, because that's the question, but as you suggested, also the impact that this transition and time of change around the season, but also new starts and new beginnings, new families, and our own things going on in our own life, that all of these things obviously will affect the children that are showing up and coming to our setting. So I think it's really important to mention that, because from the work I'm doing, I'm hearing and seeing that educators are feeling really extra exhausted and worn out at this time of the year, and that are going on, within our sector, that are directly impacting and influencing the work and the way in which they're able to offer that care and support to children. So some of those things are obviously, really crucial to mention, but also we're still seeing, and it's relevant to bring into the conversation, that our settings and our educators, but specifically children and families, we are still seeing the impact of COVID and the consequences. Children being at home, not having socialised with other children, and the impact of mothers and fathers, as parents who have not had those opportunities to socialise, to think about the ways in which paternity leave or maternity leave changed or impacted, their whole life and, experience. And so there's lots of change as well around drop-offs, collections, routine, settling in. Those factors are really important for us to talk about, because we're seeing a change, and I'm sure you're hearing and seeing this through your work, in the social, emotional, mental health needs of children, and the communication and language needs of children. And also, we are more aware, I think, of neuro-inclusive practice. We're more aware of the identity of the children, thinking about culture, race, ethnicity, thinking about the whole experience that, holistically wraps itself around a child. And so all of those, I suppose, political, cultural and financial uncertainties, as well as the impact of kind of COVID, are perhaps, coming together to really shape and influence, a change to our earlier settings and the way in which we're offering and providing care.
Yeah, I think as well, it's because well-being is a personal thing, but it's also a contagious thing. So that's why we talked about the well-being of practitioners, but also the well-being of parents. And you're dead right, in periods of transition, whatever that may be, if you as a parent are not feeling in your best place because you're anxious or you're nervous, or your first child is going off to some kind of childcare and you're used to having them at home, that will all leak out, even subconsciously. Then you've got members of staff who, and historically, I've been in education for 30 odd years, and still the night before the first day of term, you don't sleep particularly well, even though it's all going to be okay. And all those extra pressures around COVID catch-up, around the pressures around the sector, around pay, around ratios, all of those things, expectations, Ofsted. So when we think about children's well-being in the spaces, it's almost like when you drop a stone into a pond and you've got those rings and those ripples. So the child is like the stone in the middle, but all of those things around the outside will affect that well-being. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we can do as practitioners is acknowledge, even though it makes perfect sense, that our level of well-being will directly impact on that of the children that we are caring for, and therefore we need to do as much as we can that's within our power to make sure that we have really good, healthy mental health habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes that's easier said than done, especially when you said, the pressures, the things that are relating to the role that are affecting the way we are able to offer and care for children. So what I am suggesting, what I'm talking about, is that often settings, whether you are a large like PVI setting, a day nursery, whether you're a childminder who works alone, whatever your usual routine is, that's typical for you and the children within your care, it's thinking about the cohort of children and the needs of those children and how well we're getting to know them. And in these early kind of days during the autumn term, as we are, even if a child has been with you for a number of years, if you're bringing in new children and new families or new staff members, and we're thinking about the change in season and weather and all of these different factors, we are wanting to change, reflect, focus on what we need to do perhaps differently. Sometimes I think we can be creatures of habit, so we're doing what we think we should be doing. So we've got to do an activity and I've got to upload this for, the software for parents or whatever. And sometimes the routine, the daily operation, the organisation of the environment is not always conducive to developing attachments and settling in the children, or we're not adapting and changing what we're doing to the needs of particular children. And I don't mean just in periods of transition when they start with us. I mean always, any normal day. So how are we responding? And it's okay if we haven't done certain things, because if we haven't got that attachment, or children don't feel psychologically safe with us in the environment that we're trying to create, if we're not nurturing that safety and that reassurance, then they're not going to be able to enjoy or interact or engage in anything that we're trying to plan. And unfortunately, sometimes we are guilty of doing things for other people. So we're doing things for Ofsted, or we're doing things for a line manager, or we're doing something that, ought to be done. But actually, it's taking away from what children actually need from us, which is often just that being safe, being close by, giving that that point of safety. So how do we
I think
that,
You're dead right, and I think our profession is a very policy-driven, outcomes, expectations-driven profession, and it doesn't always / often, which is a whole different podcast, start with the child. It starts with a political agenda about what we should be achieving at the other end of the spectrum. And actually, we're never going to get there if we don't start with the child. And that feeling of well-being for any of us, especially for children, as you said, comes from feeling safe, secure, familiar, and engaged. And I think for any setting, you're dead right. The focus should be on forging good relationships and getting children as familiar as possible with the space as quickly as possible, which usually means spending lots of time in it, exploring it, rather than being really driven by the clock. And again, loads of settings are very clock heavy. So it's snack time, phonics time, singing time, outdoor time. And in the very early stages, and you could argue, and later on, those things really should go out of the window. It should just be about, let's be together in a space, getting to know each other, so that when children are coming down the path, they are skipping down the path rather than clinging to somebody's leg saying, I don't want to go back there because it all feels a bit weird.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, if the children feel a bit weird, then the staff are surely feeling a bit weird. And emotions are contagious, especially, emotions that kind of make us feel weird or make us feel sad, that don't make us feel good about ourselves. And so, Ofsted always say, what does it feel like to be a child here? And, how are we tailoring our approach to say, actually, if Ofsted have come calling or someone is asking us, well, why are you doing this today? Then we are empowering ourselves as educators that actually are spending the most amount of time with these children outside of their home, away from their main caregivers, saying, I know this child really enjoys doing this, or this week we have been focusing on, how we have snack or how we are going to explore the room. And too often, especially thinking about COVID, and as you're talking about that ripple effect, actually still trying to do a lot of the same things. And so the impact is staff are feeling stressed out because actually it isn't working. So, what I always say, what does it feel like, in your space? What does it sound like when you take a moment, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, next time you're in work, like I always kind of joke about, if you're ever on the late shift, if you do work in a nursery or you go in later in a school, and the day has started without you, and you hear the noise, the sound, what type of morning your colleagues have had based on what it feels like to you. And so you're picking up on that energy, you're picking up on those noises. How are the children speaking to each other? What are the sounds we can hear? How are staff speaking to each other? Because our environments they're an echo chamber. And so, we've all probably seen a child do the register pretending to be us, or a group of children like us.
Yeah. But we're always horrible.
And so, what does it feel like to be here? And how am I, as that person who is that welcoming face, who often educators are spending so much time planning and going above and beyond, because unfortunately that is what the job is wanting to really demand. But without realizing it, we are setting ourselves up and the children up to fail by not just focusing on their social emotional needs. How can I make sure that we're all feeling comfy in this space and we're getting to know each other? And if I'm having lots of accidents, or children aren't settling in, or it feels really stressful, there's certain pinch points in the day, then what can I do differently? How can we readdress this? And I think it's everyone being able to have a voice to speak up and share their views and consideration of the environment and what adjustments need to be made to support, the needs of the children that are in that space.
And having time as a team to do exactly what you've talked about and not feel the pressure of snack and activities and teaching points, and just think, right, we can all stand back and just exist in the space and breathe it and feel it, and then watch and observe and then give an opinion on, this is what I saw, this is how it felt. Because we're best in the world by trying to do the best job that we can under the pressure that we've got. We're often just going from one job to the next job to the next job, and you don't have time to really lift your head up and look because you're too busy saying, right, well, I need you, or this needs resetting, especially early days when you've got children rampaging through your setting, literally trashing it in their wake, and you spend so much time saying, oh, could just pop that down there and I just need to tidy this up here. So I think sometimes having a strategy for what you know is a truth around how children behave, especially in the early days, and giving permission to your team to say, right, everything else other than relationships goes out of the window, and we'll keep reviewing this on a regular basis, but let's just be in this space together with these children. Then let's talk about it at the end of the day. Then let's go home because we're knackered and not do anything else other than come back tomorrow and do it all again until we feel we're in a position where we're all comfortable. And that, when you can do that and you feel guilt-free doing it, actually has untold benefits for what's then going to happen for the rest of the year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because if we're getting the foundations right, those building blocks right, then what I always talk about in terms of well-being is it's the heart of your provision. And we know that when it comes to children, but for educators, not always so much. But it starts with educator well-being, and it's like a thread, isn't it, that weaves and overlaps and intertwines its way through everything. And so, if the children are settled and happy and they've established those, relationships with their caregivers, and their caregivers know them, well, and can talk about them and describe them, then you don't need a folder with loads of observations and stuff that's unnecessary. Because actually, can you speak about these children, from the heart? Do you know what they like? Do you include things for them? Of course you do. Intrinsically, you're doing it without even thinking about it because you've got to know them. And so how then does that, I suppose, bring about the overall well-being of everybody in that space? And so then when we are getting to know children in that way, we're then allowing the children to start to access and understand the world around them based on the things that they know and that they enjoy, rather than what we think or force on them and what they should be doing, and not having those set expectations of kind of every single child in a linear fashion, because learning isn't like that, is it? And so how then, as you touched upon, as educators, are we protecting our energy as a team to say, enough today, we're focusing on the children, we get to know them, this is great, brilliant, but to be able to come and do this again tomorrow and again the next day and all the way up until Christmas, then the next time we have any time off or whatever that might be, what do we need to do to protect ourselves? The reality is very few conversations happen like that, and the time is that precious factor, isn't it? We never have enough of it, and that is sometimes a barrier that gets in the way of us connecting to each other as educators.
Yeah, and always feeling the pressure of the jobs to be done. And I think that idea of well-being kind of being the heart of your setting is a lovely way to kind of end this first episode. Now, obviously, as you'll know, if you've been listening, there's loads more that we can touch on, and Kate and I will do our best through the next few episodes to give you some really concrete advice into how you can really make well-being the heart of your setting. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about how we can really foster that sense of well-being and make positive connections with children. So do come back and join us then. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest Kate for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Kate Moxley. Now, if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and also access exclusive follow-up content, which includes ideas for your setting and the links to all the relevant resources.